What child is this who lay to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthem sweet, while shepherds watch our King? This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him light, the babe, the Son of Mary. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh, come peasant king to own him. The King of kings salvation brings, let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise, raise the song on high, the Virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born, the babe, the Son of Mary. Nails, spears shall pierce him through, the cross he bore for me, for you. Hail, hail, the Word made flesh, the babe, the Son of Mary.
The book of John is a book in the Bible where the author John, who was one of Jesus' followers and brightest disciples, endeavors to tell us and tell the world exactly who Jesus is. In John's account, we find a particular passage that captures both Jesus' relationship with us and the relationship we're to have with each other. In John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus says something that probably most Christians have heard, but I'm not sure how often this command is recognized as one of the most clear and impactful that Jesus ever gave. John 13, 34 and 35 says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So what does this kind of love look like, this love that Jesus has for us? Well, it's only possible to truly understand the depth of his love for us when we understand where we would stand without that love. I'd like to tell you a story. And though I tell the story about a nameless man, I want you to realize that it is a story about every one of us and the people that have gone before us, as well as those who may yet come after. But first, welcome to Mountain View Church. My name's Aaron, and we're so glad to have you and that you could join us for our Advent series leading up to Christmas. We'd love to connect with you. So if you're watching online and you'd like to reach out to us with any thoughts or questions or prayer requests, just click on the Connect tab at our website, mountainview.church, or text Connect to the number on your screen. For those listening on the radio or the podcast, that number is 867-322-8001. On Sunday mornings in-house, we offer a full base camp program for our kids. But if you're watching online at home and you want to access the teaching materials and activities for the kids at home, go to our website, mountainview.church/basecamp, and you can find them there. Or text children to 867-322-8001. We also have a youth program for students, which will be up and running again come January. We alternate between junior and senior youth every week, so find out which group is a fit for you by going to our website, mountainview.church/youth, or text youth to that number again, 867-332-8001.
Hello. I will be lighting the fourth candle for Advent, and this candle is representing love. I will also be reading from Isaiah 53, verses 1 through 6. Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, and like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was pierced for our iniquity, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned, every one, to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all.
And now to our story. There once was a man, just an ordinary man, who lived an ordinary kind of life in a city not too far away and in a time not too far from now. This city was ruled by a king who lived apart from his subjects, with the people living in a city and the king living in a great castle on a hill. And though the man had heard plenty about his king, for it was said that all the good things that the man and his fellow countrymen enjoyed were theirs as a result of the king's generosity, the man had never actually met the king. And the man didn't think much about the king at all. In the city, it was easy to forget about the castle on the hill and this supposed provider king. It was very easy for the man to forget altogether that his blessings came from somewhere. Like most of his fellows, he was quite happy to ignore that fact altogether. The man even found that he ended up giving himself most of the credit for his pleasant life and circumstances. And he had a growing resentment for the idea that his king had anything to do with it at all. It was very easy to completely forget that he was part of a kingdom. It was much easier to focus entirely on what was right in front of him, on the things that he can see and touch, rather than think about the possibility of a greater, far more important reality playing out just beyond his sight. The fact that he didn't think about greater things, however, did not mean that greater things weren't there. The king was said to be a good king, but the king had many enemies everywhere, who were said to be wicked and evil, and who sought to defeat him and his goodness, and indeed destroy the entire kingdom. However, the man who knew neither the king nor the king's foes didn't concern himself with such matters. These enemies were said to have successfully infiltrated the kingdom long ago, and were even now present among the common folk, spreading their hatred of the king to everyone. In fact, had the man put much thought into it at all, he would have realized that though the king was said to be good, most people at this point in time hated the king, though they couldn't really say why. And had he looked deep inside, the man would have found that he also shared in this hatred. The people in the city had never met the king, and they were quick to scoff at the notion of having any gratitude for the common graces that the whole city shared in every day. Rather, they preferred to challenge the idea of the king's goodness with questions and statements to each other like, if he's so good, why do bad things still happen? Or, well, he's not my king. He's never done anything for me, so why should I care about him? The king's enemies had done their work well. It was as if there was a secret war going on, and the propaganda of the enemy had become the mantra of the people. The man had, of course, heard rumors of a secret war, and some, a very small few, seemed to be actively resisting the king's enemies in their rhetoric. But this all seemed very distant and unimportant to the man when compared to the very clear reality of his day-to-day comings and goings. The king never meant much to him, and he was quite sure that he never meant much to the king either. And that was just fine, as long as there was food on the table, money in the bank, and fun to be had. The man had no reason to care about much else. In addition to food, money, and fun, the man had love in his life. In fact, he had all three of the kinds of love that he was familiar with. He'd earned them, and he'd grown to depend on all three. The man believed he deserved these loves, and if he was being honest, probably took them for granted. But when he thought about it, he was happy to have them, and he didn't see any reason to look for any kind of love beyond these three. They seemed to be enough to satisfy any need he had, and were enough to overcome any obstacle he faced. The first love, and the one that most enchanted him, as I suspect is the case with most men and women, was the love called Eros. This is the love he experienced when he looked at his wife. This was the love that, at times, drove him mad with desire and made men and women do crazy things, irrational things, when it was in full bloom. It was a consuming and enveloping love. He felt very lucky to have a wife for whom he still felt this kind of love, for he knew that in many relationships, eros faded over time from an overwhelming kind of brilliance to a dull kind of duty or series of obligations. The eros in his life was, he was quite sure, enough to keep him satisfied come what may, and more than enough to ease any heartache that might arise. The second love, and the one that he most depended on to get him through the tough times, as I suspect is the case with most men and women, was the love called storge. This was the love that he experienced when he thought of his family. It was a solid and strong sort of love. This love was the one that gave him a sense of comfort when something went seriously wrong, like when there was a sickness or a financial problem, as that was when the whole family would band together in order to help the one who was ill or destitute get through. They looked after each other, and he could share anything with them. Well, almost anything. And there was a strong bond built over lifetimes that had been dependable for all his days. He felt very lucky to have a strong family with whom he felt this kind of love. For he knew that in many families, storge could be broken by certain circumstances or disagreements and could quickly devolve from loyalty to a deep-seated animosity in even the strongest of family units. However, not his family, he thought. The storge in his life, he was quite sure, was enough to get him through anything, and more than enough to solve any problem that might arise. The third love, and perhaps the one he most enjoyed, and looked at to pick him up and make him laugh when he was in even the worst of moods, as I suspect is the case with most men and women, was a love called philia. This is the love that he experienced when he was with his friends. This love was a strange and somewhat chaotic sort of love because it seemed to know no logic or order. Many of his friends were very different than him, and they didn't even see each other very often. And yet there was a joy and a casual sense of camaraderie that was very apparent when they were together. He felt very lucky to have friends with whom he shared this kind of love, for he knew that in many friendships, time and life changes had a way of causing even the best of friends to drift apart and lose touch with each other. However, his friend group was different, and they would forever be making each other laugh. The philia in his life, he was quite sure, would always lift his spirits, and his friends would always be there for him, no matter what circumstances might arise. The man thought he had everything he could need or want. He had eros to capture his heart, he had storge to depend on, and he had philia to carry him through. Nothing could break these bonds, and these loves would overcome anything. The man didn't even know that there was a fourth kind of love that he had yet to experience, and may never have known about it, had everything just carried on normally. In his mind, he never had any reason to look beyond himself and the life and the love that he knew. He certainly never had any reason to consider the castle, or the enemies of the king, or the secret war, or the strange gnawing hatred towards the king that he couldn't quite explain, but sure enough could be found in the deepest recesses of his heart. He never put much thought into these things until one day everything changed, and his eyes were opened to much more than he had considered up until now. This was the day that he realized that the kingdom was indeed at war. The kingdom had been infiltrated, and the enemy had not only taken control of the city, but also the minds and the hearts of the people without anyone even noticing. The man realized there was trouble when the king's enemies began calling for the overthrow of the king and open rebellion among the people. It seemed that there were now sides, and the king's enemies were intent on destroying the kingdom, and most of the people had chosen the side of the enemy. The man didn't want to choose sides. He didn't want a war, and he had no interest in a rebellion. He just wanted to be left alone. But this middle ground was not an option, and he was quickly captured by the king's enemies. Suddenly, the fact that he was caught up in a real war became very real to him, and he became very afraid. The man's eyes were open now, and he turned his gaze toward the castle on the hill. He had been so pleasantly distracted with his own life and his own loves that he had never even considered that there might be protection within the castle walls that he'd one day need. He was so used to ignoring the castle that he had entirely forgotten that it was even there. And he was so used to the idea that he had everything in his own life well in hand that he had never considered the possibility that should trouble arise, safety could be found with the king. Even now, he didn't think to cry out for rescue. The king's enemies were powerful, and the kingdom appeared to be in chaos and disarray. The man realized that he, and indeed all of the population, were prisoners and being held for ransom. Though most of the people had willingly joined the rebellion, it turns out they were indeed prisoners of the enemy regardless. They had been tricked into committing high treason and had fallen for it. They had been seduced by the infiltrators and convinced that they didn't need their king. And now they were in chains and condemned to death by their own doing. They had rebelled against their king, and now were being held ransom by the very ones who had organized the rebellion in the first place. The hopelessness of his situation was not lost on the man, for what king would be willing to pay a ransom for a people that had turned on him? Of the three kinds of love the man knew in his life, none would overlook a crime such as treason. The man thought of his loves and all he had put his hopes into up until that point, and it became clear that they couldn't be of any help to him here and now. All the eros in the world couldn't set him free and ease the heartache he now felt as he considered his fate. All the storge in the world could not fix this and solve the problem of his hopelessness and helplessness. And all the philia in the world could not lift his spirits in the face of this stark reality. And the friends that he thought would be there for him come what may were either nowhere to be found or had joined the enemy in their rebellion and were now in chains alongside him. There had been chances for things to be different, but those chances now seemed to have passed. See, back when the rumors of the war had started circulating, there had been another rumor, one that he had chosen to ignore. It had been said that there was safety to be had within the castle walls. In fact, the king long ago had made a proclamation to everyone in the city that the castle doors would open to whomever might seek refuge. When things had been good, the man and most of his countrymen never saw any reason to pay attention to this offer, as it seemed like it would add nothing to his life. After all, he had all three kinds of love. And who needed the king in his castle and safety and refuge when life was already so great? When things had begun to get worse, and the rebellion had become more open, the king had again sent word to the people, stating that even rebels could find forgiveness and safety within the castle, if only they'd be willing to turn and seek refuge. But the man had ignored this because he didn't see himself as a rebel or part of any rebellion. After all, he was just trying to stay out of it and do his own thing. Then it seemed like suddenly things became black and white. It became obvious to the man that those who were still in the city and had ignored the king's call for escape to the castle were prisoners, and they could not leave of their own accord even if they wanted to. Their lives were forfeit as the king's enemies closed the noose. The man was lost, and the ransom the king's enemies demanded for his life was more than he or any common man could ever hope to pay. A debt was now owed, and the price for an unpaid debt of this nature could be nothing other than death. Ransoms came with a time limit. The time was running out. The price for his ignorance to the realities of the kingdom, of the war, and to not seek refuge with the king was going to cost him everything. There was nothing anyone could do about it. None of the three loves in his life, eros, storge, or philia, could change this fact. It was, however, at this time, through all the desperation and emptiness he felt, that suddenly there came a whisper of hope. The castle doors, long shut, opened, and there was the king. He left the safety of the castle walls and was among the people, spreading news of a rescue. He had stepped down beyond the distant security of the castle and walked throughout the city, unafraid of what his enemies might do to him. They would surely kill him if they got the chance, but he was not deterred by the threat. So the king was on a mission, a rescue mission, and the price for the safety of his people and their release from their chains would be high, higher than any normal king would ever have been willing to pay. However, this was no normal king, and it was through the king's actions that the man and his fellow prisoners came to know a fourth kind of love, one that outshone all the others, a love that could set them free and bring hope to the hopeless. This was the love that the king had for a people who had never met him. It was the love that the king had for a people who had hated him. It was the love he had for people that had openly rebelled against him and chosen to side with the enemy. It was a love of unlimited power. It was a love of self-sacrifice. It was the love called agape. When I sat down to write this sermon on love, I had no intention of writing a story, and yet a story came out. I had simply wanted to talk about the three kinds of love that we all tend to think about when the word love is mentioned. But in order to get to the fourth kind of love, agape, which is the love that God has for us, I guess maybe a story was there to be told. Agape is the love that we see personified in the person of Jesus Christ, who was and is God in the flesh, and is our King, come to rescue us. See, humanity is in rebellion against God. And as a result, we are chained by our sin and condemned to death and eternal separation from God. Whether we've spent our lives in open rebellion with a loud hatred towards God, or just ignored him and tried to live our lives without acknowledging him, not picking sides, so to speak, we humans are at enmity with God. We are condemned, and we desperately need to be rescued. We need a rescuer who has a capacity to love and forgive far beyond our own capacity to love and forgive. This brings us to Jesus. There's a prophecy in the book of Isaiah that is often looked at in Advent sermons on love, and it sheds light on God's love. And I want to go there now. And we'll see that this rescue that we all need was foretold long before people ever saw Jesus or knew anything about the cross. Isaiah 53 reveals the suffering servant who bears our iniquities, demonstrating God's sacrificial love for us. Isaiah 53, 1-6 says, "Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised. We esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds, we are healed. All like sheep we have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." This is what Jesus did for us. He came to this earth, came to our physical realm, which he made. He set aside the glory and the majesty that is his and condescended to the point of being born a human baby in a smelly, dirty manger, to a girl who was no royalty and to a people that were lost. And he lived amongst us, God with us. We were in open rebellion against him. Humanity turned its back, and yet he came anyway. He didn't come in all the pomp and fanfare that would befit a king who came to be served. He came in all the humility and love of one who came to serve. Matthew touches on this in Matthew 20:28. He says, "Even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and give his life as a ransom for many." Humanity was condemned by our sin, every one of us. And yet, because Jesus came and laid down his life for us on our behalf, we have been rescued. John 3:16 and 17 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through him." The castle doors opened, the king stepped forth, and then the people, we, knew a fourth kind of love. The king laid down his life to pay a ransom for a bunch of haters and rebels. This is the love that we call agape. We read at the beginning John 13, 34 and 35, and I want to read it one more time in closing. And let us consider how Jesus' instruction in this verse applies to us and what it looks like for us to obey him. John 13, 34 and 35, Jesus says, "A new commandment I give you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are to love one another. And by this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The command is not only to love one another, but the love that he speaks of is agape. This is an action, not an emotion. You cannot force yourself into feeling love for one another. It's not a command to feel a certain way at all. It is a command to act for each other's good, sacrificially and not for gain, but for each other's benefit. And why do we do this? So that people will know that we belong to Christ. Christ laid down his life for us, and by that action, we know how much he loves us. When we act in that same sort of loving way towards each other, people will know that we are his, and we will begin to feel more love as a result. Now, we may not always like each other. We definitely won't always love each other perfectly. But this Christmas and going forward, if we endeavor to put others before ourselves, to serve each other rather than expect to be served, we will find our bonds will be stronger, our witness will be more apparent, and our capacity to love will grow as God does his work in us. God bless you all. Let's pray. Father, thank you for giving me this story. Thank you for giving me a way to share the love of Christ in something that lands maybe differently, but is focused on a love that we don't deserve, that you give us anyway. Lord, I pray there's something in this that just stands out to people's hearts. And Lord, that there's someone out there who would recognize maybe for the first time that you love them. You love them no matter where they come from, no matter what they've done, no matter who they've been. And you offer a rescue through Jesus Christ. Lord, I pray you would give us all the words to share with others, to show this love, that we would all be good representatives of you this Christmas. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hi, I'm Katarina MacArthur, and I serve as the secretary on the board of Mountain View Church. The past weeks, as we have been focusing on hope, peace, joy, and this week, love, I'd like to take a moment and turn our attention to a place on this earth where hope is small because there is no peace, and where joy is hard to come by because of all the sorrow, terror, and despair. Where people are drawn into conflict they did not ask for. Where families lose loved ones on a daily basis because of horrific bloodshed in a war that has age-old religious roots. We cannot ignore the suffering of our brothers and sisters in Israel, Lebanon, and Gaza, where war, violence, injustice, and suffering are a daily reality. While we gather in our cozy living rooms around our Christmas tree this season, we must not forget that we have a responsibility. We need to be on our knees in prayer for this region. We invite you to consider joining us in a prayer group for the Middle East. Starting January, we would like to get together bi-weekly to start with to pray. We are partnering with FAIR, Fellowship Aid and International Relief, to support a project in Beirut called Cedar Home, a Christian home for abandoned newborns, as well as orphaned and disadvantaged Syrian, Palestinian, and Iraqi refugees, and stateless girls in Lebanon. Karim and Rita Anaisi lead a ministry with children in their care and humanitarian work caring for displaced families from the current war between Israel and Hezbollah. It's important to note that this prayer group is not a place for a political debate or clash of opinion. It is meant as an instrument of love to come together in unity and to lift up this region in prayer, and to support Karim and Rita as they're being the hands and feet of Jesus to care for those who are most vulnerable in this war-torn place. We would also like to give money towards this work as a tangible way to bring relief and make a real difference. So perhaps your heart is moved to reach out and love the season and join this initiative. If you are interested, please contact me at secretary@mountainview.church.
Good morning, Mountain View. Katie Bodwin here with Senior Youth Group. I just wanted to remind everyone that there will be no Senior Youth Gathering on December 22nd, as we had our year-end finale on December 8th. So stay tuned for the new year to see what we're up to. One thing to add, Senior Youth is looking for new youth leaders. We're looking to expand our numbers so that we can provide a consistent ministry for the senior youth that happens twice a month. It's the second and the fourth Sundays of every month from 6 to 8 p.m. If you could prayerfully consider if this is a ministry that you could help with, we'd love to speak with you. You can talk to anyone in leadership, or if you'd like more information, you can send me an email at sryouth@mountainview.church.
So, as we do at Mountain View, we always love to leave you with a discussion question that you can talk about amongst yourselves. And this question just seemed rather obvious. What can you do this Christmas to show agape love to others? And then the prayer request, one that I would ask that we would all pray, is that those in our lives who don't yet know Jesus would see his love through us. That's it for today. God bless you and Merry Christmas.